My name is Lavetanalagi Seru, and I am with the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network, which is a regional umbrella body for civil society organizations and other key non-state actors that work on climate justice here in the Pacific. My work as the regional policy coordinator is to coordinate basically the Pacific's regional policy inputs to hear, to harvest policy inputs from our members, from grassroots climate affected communities, and make sure that we're channeling these to the highest level of, policy and decision making spaces. Climate change is actually one of the biggest issue that's confronting the Pacific today. In fact, across our way of life, when we look at development, when we talk about security, when we talk about gender-based violence, climate crisis, the climate crisis has been one of those cross-cutting issues that's come a lot in most of the conversations. Starting to deal with climate migration and climate displacement in some of the community, climate relocation. In Fiji alone, we've seen 4 communities being relocated and another 40 communities that are earmarked for relocation. Sea level rise, ocean acidification has an impact on coastal communities, on their livelihoods, and even the cultural and traditional way of life for Pacific people has in a way been impacted as well. Over 60% of communities alone in Fiji are coastal communities, and in some way, so that's a large part of the population, and so in one way or another, they're being either they are facing intense, frequent tropical disasters or climate-induced disasters like flooding, or they're experiencing sea level rise that's leading to loss of arable lands, that's leading to seawater intrusion, affecting their farms. There was a community that we had visited a few years back where as a result of the ocean coming in, sea level rise, the crabs, the small crab that you normally see at the beach were, eating away most of their crops. So they had to relocate their farms a few hundred meters inland, which was an issue for, elderly people. It was an issue for women, because now they have to walk a few hundred meters to get to the farms, placing, huge stress on their body, on especially on elderly people. So there are other marginalized groups, for instance, particularly the LGBTQI, which this has surfaced, where with every single disaster that happens, they have sort of been scapegoated, and they've been blamed by the rest of the community, to say that because of your sinful ways, your actions, God is punishing us. But the reality is, this has been a symptom of capitalism and neoliberalization of economies and patriarchy in communities. The fact that we are not limiting our global carbon emissions. So the ocean is warming. We know that tropical cyclones, especially here in the Pacific, they derive their energy or their strength from the warmth of the ocean. The more warmer the ocean, the more stronger the tropical cyclones, and so that's something that people are trying to deal with. The other micro what do you call these realities that are happening within the communities that's impacting and undermining human rights of people, whether it's access to to a shelter, or access to water and food, or even safety and security. People with disabilities, for instance, we've heard from them the experience of not being able to access some of the evacuation centers because they are not accessible to them, or it's come to a point now where after a disaster, the government doesn't have enough funds to pay for recovery and rehabilitation efforts. So what it has done is that it has allowed people to access their pension funds, for them to use those pension funds to rebuild their homes, to rebuild their livelihoods. And the concerns that we have is that, especially for young people who have just started work, have just started to save some, funds in their pension fund, they now have to withdraw. So with every intense and a frequent tropical cyclone or disaster, they have to withdraw funds. And by the time they actually retire, there's nothing to fall back on. Become, a water security, a water security issue, a social security issue as well, a health security issue. We're hearing of mothers that have to give birth by the river or on the roads on the way to hospitals because the nearest health center has been, totally damaged by tropical cyclone and haven't been repaired or haven't been, the government just doesn't have funds to build back some of these infrastructures, critical. We see sadness, we see anger in the eyes of people. We see worry. There's a lot of stress. One single disaster like the tropical cyclone Winston that hit Fiji back in 2016, that sort of wiped away 1/3 of our GDP in terms of losses. The tourism industry had to close down. Most of the hotels had to close down. People were out of work, and so people, who lost their jobs had to, move away from their rented homes, back to their village. There was a lot of stress and helplessness, but that's not to say that, in the face of the climate crisis, that specific people, are helpless. No. They take it on them to be resilient. They take it on them to move on, to find solutions to the kind of issues that they are facing, drawing from traditional and knowledge and indigenous wisdom. So people are also building back, using, trying to move on from, the destruction, the despair. So, I would say that there's anger, but also people are resilient. If you've seen some of the photos, especially after tropical cyclones and other climate disasters, you see people smiling in the face of, a disaster. So there's hope. There's hope, and I think this is why we do the work that we do, is try to pressure governments, especially industrialized, developed countries, to limit their carbon emissions, transition to low carbon, just economies, to meet their global commitments, in terms of providing climate finance that's necessary for the Pacific, the 1.5 degree target that's reflected in the Paris Agreement. That for the Pacific is critical. It's a survival. Going beyond the 1.5 limit is loss and damage to the Pacific. It's death. It's translating to death. It's translating to loss of homes, loss of livelihoods, and these are in the thousands when it comes to the impact it's going to have. So every fraction of the degree really matters to the Pacific, and this is this whole thing about spirituality in the context of how their relatedness to the ocean and the land. And so when we see things like these massive pits of coal mines, digging it up, it's something that we are not connected to in a way. It seems foreign. It seems against who we are as indigenous people. We don't dig,
you don't identify with it at all.
No, we don't at all. So, I wish that we had a large population across the world that of indigenous identity, they're really grounded to some of the kind of beliefs and value systems that indigenous people have. Like I said earlier, learn from Pacific people, learn from indigenous people. They have a lot to offer in terms of climate solutions.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lovely summary of what spirituality, the connection to land, we're all connected. So doing this type of work, no doubt it's draining and it's emotional and it's stressful and it can be joyous when you have a win. But how do you look after yourself? How do you self-care when you're amidst all of this turbulence?
For me, being part of nature, going out, to the beach, or taking a walk. And just appreciating nature brings that sense of what do you call this? That strength, restores the kind of positive energy that drives our work. It's appreciation of nature. Taking a hike. In fact, tomorrow we're doing a hike, and then as we walk through this forest, just appreciating nature and in its totality is something that sort of distresses us from the kind of work we're doing, and that's something also that we've been trying to advocate with the young people, especially here in Fiji and across the Pacific, is getting them to appreciate nature, taking them to the ocean more, and telling them we are not the only one that benefits from the ocean, that uses the ocean. You have other thousands of other marine organisms that rely on the ocean. We also rely on the ocean. So fostering that greater sense of appreciation for the ocean or for land sort of instills in their mind that we need to take care of nature and nature will take care of us. I've sort of built that into the way I try to take myself away from all these anxiety and worry and sometimes sense of helplessness when we read reports, when we hear of the climate destruction that's happening across the world and even in the Pacific. So connecting with nature is a very useful way to to take care of yourself.
Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you so much, Kathie. It's been a pleasure.